Welcome to Conversations with the Ballet Educator. Here we blend artistry with science and tradition with innovation to create community conversations that inspire and ignite transformation. Hey Terry, it is good to see you again. I'm happy that I'm happy that we are getting together, that we're having a conversation about things that we're very passionate about, but honestly about things that deserve to be talked about. And it deserves to be talked about yesterday. But the fact that we're having this conversation today, you and me, is pretty remarkable and pretty awesome. And I'm very excited to see where it's headed towards and what we can do with it all.
Yep, I'm very excited. Thank you for inviting me, Austin.
Of course. We did meet before this meeting and whatnot. And while this one is like a real actual run through of some things that we want to talk about and some things we want to share with our industry and whatnot, I am letting the audience know this is something that we have been talking about for a long time. And we just decided, you know what, let's just get this out. Let's just get it out in the world and talk about things so that people can hear. We can start sparking the conversation. And it can be a real deal where we see potential real change happening within the industry and things are happening before our eyes. And if they don't happen before our eyes, then the point is that we encourage the next generation to do so. And so I think that's something that is very exciting about our conversation. And the conversation today is ultimately about what we are currently seeing in the ballet industry. And then, of course, the dance industry at large, but particularly the ballet industry, some like unintentional harms that are occurring because of pedagogical practices, which is like teaching styles. And then things that we're witnessing because of the traditional methods and then where it's going within today's society. Without further ado, I'm going to start us off with our first question. You ready?
I'm ready.
I'm pumped. All right, let's start our conversation based on what we've previously talked about. And we did previously talk about the polarization in teaching styles. So you had mentioned before some instructors were adhering to potentially harmful methods from their past. But on the other hand, there are those who consciously adopt a more supportive approach. So I've heard some things before, but I would love to hear about your expertise and how we can begin bridging the gap and encourage a shift towards that healthier teaching practices across the board, but particularly within the ballet industry.
It's not going to happen straight away, unfortunately. You know, as you say, bridging the gap. There's still the old style, the old school way of teaching. You do as I say, and you get out the class if you don't. So that sort of harsh way, the harsh way verbally, and the harsh way sometimes physically as well. Whereas some of the teachers that I've been doing workshops with have said that old way, they would never teach their students in the same way because they had gone through that old teaching and it really didn't do them any good. And they came out with some mental health issues, some physical issues as well, because teachers will push and push and push. And a student or even a professional dancer gets tired. And when they get tired, they get injured invariably. And so some of them have had to give up a career in dance, either during their time of being a professional or even prior to turning professional, and they've turned to teaching. And they are using that as an example of how not to teach in a more supportive way and caring way. And, you know, what I see and what I hear is that by doing so, the dancer, the student or the professional dancer is less stressed because there's no fear of going wrong. And the way that I was taught in the old days, and I don't know about you, with the way you were taught, we were taught in fear.
Mm-hmm.
Fear was created to supposedly get us to improve ourselves. You'll be no good in the career. It's a tough career. You've got to be tough. Well, yeah, you do have to be tough, but not to the point of extinction of a career. Yeah. And, you know, I can see in years to come, you know, after I've gone from this earthly coil, I can see much longer careers because the pressure is not going to be there, but the standard will have improved without tapping you on the backside with the stick to get your tail under and all of those sort of nasty things that have happened in the past. In a more caring way, correction is okay. Corrections are good. That's the way you're going to learn. But correction in a negative way will really start putting pressure, and as I mentioned before, the fear in that person. What if? And you create the what ifs, which create anxiety. What if I go wrong? What if I don't pass the exam? What if I don't get the audition? And those what ifs are created right from that first time when you're 3, 4, 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it started with joy, the enjoyment of actually doing it, and then it gets eroded as you're going along and the pressure starts. There needs to be a certain amount of pressure, but not undue pressure.
Yeah.
And that is where the gap is going to close, by giving supportive pressure, as it were. That was really nice what you did there, Jane, but unfortunately you're going to have to edit this bit.
That's okay.
I'm going to go back. That was really good that you did there. But if you extended your arm a bit longer and have your fingers straighter, that would really look nice. And so you're correcting, but you're being supportive rather than, that's no good, do it again. And that really puts the fear of God into people. And so they're more likely to make more mistakes with this fear, with this anxiety.
Very interesting. The thing that I think that people often think about is, especially teachers and young teachers, and I thought of this before too when I first started teaching, was I need to be that like person in front of the room. The students need to fear me. The students need to have this understanding that I have the knowledge and they do not, and they need to seek after that knowledge and then move forward with it however way possible. But what I've seen happen because of that is competition within the studio. I've seen some people do some things that they are not proud of because they saw another person as a potential threat against their education. And there are so many other things that, of course, we're going to talk about. But those are some things that I've witnessed. And then because of that time and because I saw that before my eyes, I knew that like something had to change. And it wasn't anything within there's nothing I could have done in that moment within the industry, but there was a ton that I could have done for my students because of the way that I was practicing as a teacher. And so it was from that switch that I actually saw the same students the next year. And once I made that switch, I saw this humongous change of like, I started the class with this, hey, we're here to learn ballet. Everybody here is here to learn ballet. And so let's practice that. Let's work together to try to understand ballet for ourselves, but also this community that we have here in this class. And it was just a very interesting thing to start off with and a phenomenon to start off with, because as soon as they entered the classroom, it wiped that fear out of the door. And of course, they still had that like undertone of fear because it has been ingrained in us, like you said. But for them, as soon as they entered into the room and they saw that change or transformation in me, they knew that they were like, he's not seeking after excellence. He's seeking after progress. He's seeking after the moments and not the product. And it was such an awesome experience to undertake that I think every single teacher should experience it because of the absolute transformational change that can happen with students. And so that's something that we're going to talk about today, is like, how is that possible? But especially with the traditional approach and the criticism from the crowd and the criticism from the industry, and it doesn't work that way. But there is one point that I do want to touch upon that you had mentioned, which is moreover like the way in which students respond based on fear. In your expertise, what are some things that you have experienced from working with both industry dancers, professional dancers, but also students in that like fear realm? Is there anything that has like come about, or things that you've noticed to be very similar amongst dancers and their responses in the class or outside of the class? I hope that question made sense. It was kind of on the spot.
I got the gist of it. It's that the main thing is fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, because we as dancers, whether students or professionals, were always corrected. Every day we get a correction. There's also a fear of not being corrected. Oh, they haven't noticed me. I'm not good in. So it's a double whammy there. And so when you look at dancers, they have to appreciate that teachers don't necessarily, or ballet masters, ballet mistresses, don't necessarily take in everything that is going on. But the fear has been built in from an early age. And so when a teacher or a ballet master or ballet mistress don't notice you, or you think they don't notice you, they probably have noticed you, but there's nothing to correct. So you are good enough. And I think that the affirmations of I am okay, I am good enough in those circumstances will be good. And thank the person, thank the teacher, thank the ballet master or mistress for giving you a correction and taking it on board. The students should have their little notebooks, write down their corrections after class or even during class so that you remember what's going, in between the exercises or in between a break. And work on those, and just work on one thing at a time. Don't try and work on so many different things. You're just going to get lost. As long as you've got them in the notebook, you mark down the days that you've worked on it and then go on to the next thing. And that's the way you're going to improve, not by trying to do everything all at once. You're just going to set yourself up for failure if you do that. Now, I want to continue this with what you mentioned about the studios in competition. The studios are fearful as well. Studios are a business. The business needs customers. And if one studio has more passes or better passes in exams, has got more cups, more medals, more whatevers from competitions, that's how they're going to improve. But the only thing is, are they the ones that aren't being kindly and supportive, but they're getting the results? And so the throwback that you and I are going to get, yes, but are you going to get results from it? Well, yes, you do. You, Austin, have found that by working in a different way, you are getting results without that undue pressure. And I think it's wonderful what you're doing. You are an example of what you're talking about. You're walking the talk, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. You have a great point, and the point being that it's such a dynamic and multifaceted dilemma, in that it does start at that young age. And when I say it does, I mean the tactics that we use as teachers and setting up the next generation for the industry starts at that young age. And it's the way in which teachers need to respond to students, or not even respond, because like you said, some students won't even say anything, or they'll think that like they're worse off because the teacher didn't say anything. Well, maybe it's that you need to hit every single student in that class and say at least one thing to those students. That's what I do. And man, I've seen such an impact because of just that one tiny practice. But that's something that I believe that teachers need to start thinking about, is what is their impact within the class and within the longitudinal season that is the time and that they have with those students throughout the year, throughout the season. Because you probably see them more than I wouldn't say than their parents do, but in any situation, you see them a lot more so, and see some like raw behavior within these students than their parents probably do. And you are able to find things within those classes and the emotions that these kids go through, and you can be that light, or you can be that like heavy weight on that student. And I think it's something that teachers really need to take very seriously, especially if you're thinking about going into the profession, is what am I bringing to this relationship? How are my experiences informing the way in which I am coming across to these students? Because it is, I think you said this earlier, it really is, it's even not about the way in which you're speaking, it's also body language. It's also the way in which you're responding to one student and how that can affect another. And, I don't want to get too deep into that, because this can be very like, I just give up, I don't want to do it, I'm just going to go with my own ways. But there is a solution here, guys. There is a really easy way for us to understand what it is to kind of move forward in all this and find ways, practical ways, research-based ways, informed practices to make the class better and to help students understand that they are worthy of this education, and they are worthy of good education for that matter. But they're also worthy of just simply being there, because art is for humanity, and it's not about like gatekeeping just because of whatever reason, So very interesting.
I think the thing is, from just moving on from your point, the fact that every individual in that class is unique. So they're bringing something different. They're bringing a different background. Some of them are escaping from a violent home. So they don't want to be shouted at because they've been shouted at home, and they're going to be shouted at. Even a raised voice, just to have a raised voice above the piano or whatever music is going on, can make them freeze.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got to look at neurodiversity as well. People with either diagnosed ADHD or even undiagnosed ADHD can be overwhelmed by the noise itself, can be overwhelmed by the different instructions. So it's recognizing these things. And I think there should be courses. Well, there are courses, I know that, on understanding neurodiversity, whether it's ADHD or autism. And these are only short courses that you can do online. And for teachers, as part of CBT, sorry, I'm thinking of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, I was wondering why it sounded familiar.
Continuing professional development. To do these online courses and understand what a neurodiverse person, as opposed to a neurotypical person, sees and hears and feels in class.
Yeah, Terry, just because I think some people don't quite know what those terms are, so can you just briefly, before you move forward in your conversation, which, pardon for the interruption, but can you briefly identify and like describe neurotypical people and neurodiversity and what those are and why it would be important for teachers, dance teachers, or ballet teachers for that matter, to understand those differences?
Okay. Everyone in the world is on the neurodiverse spectrum to a certain degree. Some have stronger neurodiverse traits than others, and some clinicians years ago have come up with questionnaires that will get, it seems really arbitrary as well, to a point criteria that you've got enough points to be diagnosed with either ADHD, which is I'm thinking of autism, and it's now called autistic spectrum disorder. So there's no high functioning, there's no Asperger's, nothing like that. So there's different levels. Level 1 was the Asperger's, and then you go to level 2 and level 3. And then there's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, attention deficit disorder. There's those. They, at the levels we're talking about, are not disorders. They're an overload of their different senses that are around. And it's understanding for the individual to know at what point they're overloaded, because those traits help us as artists and performers. That's the traits.
Yeah.
When you look at someone with drive and focus and choreographer who can see ahead the planning, that's an ADHD trait.
Mm-hmm.
When you speak with people, you listen to me, I rabbit on. So these are ADHD and ASD traits. So I'm not up to the clinical diagnostic criteria. I'm nearly there. And we've spoken about this before. Those who are left to actually go to a vocational school or go into performing professionally are probably nearly or undiagnosed with one of those two or even both, autism or ADHD, because they're funneled out during training. People that can't concentrate and focus so much and they don't have the drive, they'll give up on the way. Mm-hmm. So it's not for them. And it's got nothing really to do with talent or anything like that. Some people with talent, they drop out and you think, why have you dropped out? It's really the drive and the focus that is needed. When you look at ballet training, it's black and white. You're either doing it right or you're wrong. And those are autistic traits, black and white thinking. And the need for repetitiveness. Ballet class, it repeats day in, day out.
It really does.
Same thing. And that feels comfort and safe to a person with autistic traits. So, and they're really used as derogatory terms. And it's not. You and I probably are higher up. We're less neurotypical than we are neurodiverse. Mm-hmm. And we can see the world in a different way to that which is of a neurotypical person that still has traits. Uncle Joe's got this weird way of doing such and such, as someone might think. Yeah, well, those are neurodiverse traits. So it's to be kind to people and for them to understand what their traits are. I'm not calling them neurodiverse now, but what their traits are. So they are not symptoms. It is not an illness. It is the brain that is wired in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And with neuroplasticity, that can be changed. That can change for the better, so that when you understand your traits, you won't bring them on into a detrimental state, which is then detrimental for your way of living. So I've got this actor, patient actor and screenwriter, and he comes up with ideas towards the end of the day, so like 9 or 10 o'clock. He's got to finish this idea. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he's written the first 2 episodes and a screenplay or something like that. And that is where it becomes detrimental. Because if we're the following day, then again for ADHD people, those traits of having so much in your head, 1,001 thoughts going around in your head and trying to plan the day or the next day, and you go to bed and there's all these things and you can't go to sleep. A simple one of the ways, there's so many different ways, and each individual person, it works for some and not for others, to write down on a scrap of paper all the thoughts in your head or all the things that you're going to be doing tomorrow, and then leave it by your bedside. And that is helpful for some people. It doesn't work with everybody, but it's all these different things. You can see so much advice of people with ASD and ADHD and ADD on social media. They all come out with, I've tried this and this has helped. And you even get, there's a married couple, one neurotypical, one neurodiverse. This is how this person is. And they then explain why this happens in their head, or the way that they see the world. And these are the sort of things that people that are thinking, I've been let down by school, I never spoke because I was always getting it wrong. You're not getting it wrong. It's nothing with getting it wrong. You're just thinking in a different way. People who used to stare out of the window in class because they were bored with that. Most people on the neurodiverse spectrum are highly intelligent and have a higher IQ than the average person. So it's a waste of intelligence that the school systems in the past and nowadays, just a waste. So they're not bringing in people who understand. They're just discarding those students. There is some good support in some schools. They're giving them more time to do exams if they understand what's going on. And they just call it stupid, disruptive, just because they're not concentrating on something that the governments around the world want them to. If they're not interested in history, why do it in history? Why not give them something that they're really interested in, either art or science or maths, you call it, the maths.
Yeah, I mean, you have great points, and all the points, I'm going to agree with, because we've had these conversations so many times before. And something that is very special is that I actually get to work in both but both facets of the world in an academic setting, but also in the art setting. So not a lot of people, if you're listening, I am actually an academic teacher as well. I teach biology during the day, and then I hop over in the afternoon and teach ballet. So I work at an arts high school, which is very interesting because we actually set things up for the neurodiverse student, and we set it up so that their needs are met within the classroom. Well, not first, I shouldn't say, but moreover, that their needs are met as much as a neurotypical student. Because in a typical high school setting, like what I was in, like a college preparatory school, it just didn't work for me. I was a BC student. I didn't really get straight A's, and the only time I did was in English, where I was able to actually use my creative outlet. But this is such a great point, because if you are to, as a teacher, if you are to understand your students at a deeper level than just you're in here to do ballet, you can actually help them become better ballet dancers because their needs are met. They understand that you're there for them and you're not there just to teach them a technique. Because that's everybody else in the world that is doing that. They go to school, they do the same thing. I have to learn history. I have to learn science. But they get to learn ballet. They have the opportunity to use their privilege to learn ballet and to take in a wonderful art form. And so it could be so different for us And for the students that are within our classrooms, if we meet them as a human first, and then we take their needs, we take their requirements to learn, and then we can move on from there. And that's what I do. That's what I do at the Ballet Educator and with Ballet Reeducation. Is that's all that it's about, is meeting the human needs first, and then once those needs are met, their technique, their artistry, their everything within the other realm of understanding the content will skyrocket, and you'll just see amazing like influx of just understanding, of comprehension, of all these different things come to play. And I saw that this last year too, and I'm not going to get into that just yet, but I saw that this last year with my students. As soon as I just said, you know what, technique can wait, I need to focus on my students first. I mean, we did technique, but I wasn't as hard as I was my first year. That this past year, these students, I've never seen them grow so fast. I've never seen them be more of both me, but also the art form. I've had students come up to me during the day, my academic day, and say, Mr. Crumley, I was thinking about last class, and I'm very thankful for the way in which you went about it. And like, you know, I could go off and tell you all about that class, but the fact that these students are doing that is such a testament to the experience that I'm giving to them, which took a lot of time to understand, but that's what we're doing this, you know. You don't have to take that much time to understand it like I did in order for you to have the same impact. All you have to do is just learn what we're talking about, and then you can move forward and do the same thing, which is such a phenomenal thing.
So that student that came up to you, that shows that they don't fear you.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they
They
don't fear
found that
me.
very supportive. Another thing that I wanted to ask you was, do you have, you don't obviously mention names, but do you have any students that have been diagnosed with ASD or ADHD or ADD? You do. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Do you also have students that haven't been diagnosed, but you recognize the traits?
Yes.
How do you deal in class with all of those? What sort of flexibility do you have in the way that you teach them?
So I incorporate a lot of different ways that students can interact. And ballet, traditionally speaking, we have a set bar, we have this center, we have things that we do. You are quiet as a student, and I am speaking as a teacher, and whatever I speak is gold, and you must take it in. Now, that doesn't work as great as what I'm about to say does, which is great English. But what I've started to do now is, as they come in, I greet them individually. I give them attention from the start. I make sure that I'm remembering things from before and like helping them out in the sense of like, oh, I remember you had an injury, or you said this happened last week. Everything okay now? And so that tells them that I'm interested in more than just ballet. I'm interested in their lives, and you know, it's not like a gossip session, but it's an actual motivation of, hey, this guy respects me. I'm going to respect him. You know, so I start off with that, and then when we have combinations, it's scientifically proven that when you teach a combination or you teach something, the average time someone takes to determine whether it's important or not is 7 seconds. And so it's like the students have this deciphering mechanism going on in their head, especially students on the neurodiverse spectrum. They're going to see that and be like, it's not important, I can pick it up last minute, you know. And so what I tend to do is I'll say, do it with me, do the combination with me, and then we'll do it together. And as they're doing it, I'm scanning the room and teaching it at the same time. And as I'm doing that, as soon as I'm done, sometimes I'll say, okay, you and you, person A, person B, why don't you guys work together, or get in partners rather, and what's the most important part of this exercise? What are we trying to get out of this? And then suddenly they just like change, and they think, oh my God, did I not see it? What was the exercise? And it gets them to talk about it. They're using their voice, they're using this comprehension, this understanding with each other, and they talk about it. And then after like 40 seconds, it doesn't need to take that long, even like 15 seconds it could take. After a brief period of time, I bring them back. I'm like, okay, class, does someone want to be brave? Who wants to be brave today? And let's talk about this. What's the important thing? And then they usually like, and like they're kind of scared at first because it's still there, but I'll say, and if they're too scared, then I'll actually bring up some things like, did anybody think of this? And they'll be like, oh yeah, I did. And so it gets them out of that like fear-based tactics. But once they start actually becoming comfortable and just speaking out loud, they then are thinking for themselves. They're thinking about the technique for themselves instead of just being spoon-fed. And it gives them the opportunity to take it in a new way, aside from just visually learning and auditory learning. they're actually using their voice and they're using their critical thinking skills and comprehension skills to understand the technique at hand. And so that's kind of what I do differently in my classes, in my ballet classes. And I don't do that all the time, but I do that most of the time. And that's honestly where I see the most growth, is because of that change in the way in which that I just flip the ballet classroom upside down and allow it to be their education instead of like this gatekeeping thing that I hold back and they must try to get.
I think teachers need to know the three teaching, the three learning methods. So, as you mentioned, visual, auditory, and of course, is kinesthetic. So, doing, and dancers do. They do, don't they? Do. Yeah.
They do.
They do.
I'm keeping that.
So, teachers need to understand those three methods, because it's pointless a teacher standing there and talking into the mirror with the class behind them, not showing them what they're doing and just saying, right, we're going to do this. And the poor ones that want to do kinesthetically and also visually aren't picking it up. So I was talking to some of the patients about this, and also in the workshops that I do with students and in professional dancers. And a lot of them said they would look at another dancer in the class or in rehearsal at what they're doing. And they said invariably that other person has got it wrong. So there's two people that have got it wrong, and they're shouting that. But just because the teacher hasn't bothered either turning round or doing it. And so the teachers need to understand that there are people that only have one version of a learning. And so they need to be able to do the thing 3 times. They need to show them, they need to speak clearly, and they need to do the visibility of it. So if they do, even if they did it with their hands, that's another language for dancers. If they can't do it, if they do it with the hands and say at the same time and turn round and do it, and make sure you say, if it's in a mirror and you're facing them, with your left hand, say your right hand or your right leg, if they do their left leg. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
You're doing it mirror. But if you're just showing them, then their brain is not going to necessarily work in the same way, and which is very difficult to pick things up quickly. That's just a point I wish to make when you were saying about the 3 methods of learning.
Yeah, I think those are the 3 different methods, and the way in which if people can understand how you learn, you're going to do fine. And that's something that I think kind of stuck with me as a teacher, especially when I first started teaching and I made that transition, which I made it actually very early. Just a little backstory. When I was in college, I started ballet at 15, and then I knew I needed to go to college to continue the training. And so when I was in college, I was actually a ballet performance major. But I'd performed my whole life. I did musical theater my whole life, and I was a pretty good performer, and so I knew how to do that. So I was like, you know what? I'm paying money to get a degree in something, and so let me learn something. Let me figure out a new way or a new trade. And so I chose ballet pedagogy, which is teaching ballet. So once I'd made that transition, this whole new realm opened up for me, and I started thinking about things totally different, which is something really cool. If you're a dancer listening to this, try to take a ballet class like a ballet teacher. So you need, as you're taking it, think, what is this going to do later? How is this going to prepare me for a step that is going to happen in center? And it starts making you think about the class in such a new way that it's phenomenal. It's so cool. I loved doing it. But anyways, once I was in college and I made that switch, I started working with actually current collegiate dancers in the musical theater world, and I worked with them and I understood them and I was actually in conversation with them as I was beginning my teaching practices, and they were telling me things that they needed because they weren't scared, because we were just colleagues, and they told me ways in which that worked for them, that didn't work for them, and that actually was the standard in the start of my teaching career. And then of course, it changed a little bit as I went into full teaching, because I had this whole identity to upkeep, and I needed to be this persona, but you don't. But it is such an interesting thing to experience, because like I said before, once you learn how you learn, once you figure out the way in which humans learn things, that's when you can start having a really great transformation in your ballet class. but not before you meet the human's needs. So you have to make sure that the humans feel safe and that they can learn without any fear in your class, because then they're going to actually get the material. And I will put a little tiny disclaimer in here, because it is true, if someone feels safe, their true nature is going to come out. They're going to be silly, maybe they'll be a little bit more talkative in your classes, and then we want to be fear-based tactics. We want to have those tactics at that point and be like, why are you talking? What's going on? But that's actually a testament to you as a teacher, is a testament, because they feel safe enough to be able to talk and to be able to have those times where they are just themselves in that class. And honestly, I have those moments often in my ballet classes. But instead of shutting them down and being like, why are you talking? This is not the time to talk. Sometimes I have to do that, but most of the time I go like, that's a cool conversation, but it's not the right time. And I'm glad that you're saying it, but we need to change your focus again and bring it back to ballet. And they're like, oh, you're so right. And then they come on back. So there's just approaches that we have to have as teachers to stop this harmful tendencies of the past and to start transforming and letting the classes be something brand new and like a safe haven for these dancers. Because we don't know where they come from, y'all. You don't know their family life. You don't know what's going on in their personal lives. You could save their life, which is not something that you should be constantly thinking about because it's a heavy burden. But it is something that should be in the back of your mind, is what is my class providing for the student? Maybe it is that lifeline. You never know.
Yeah. And, going back to the 3 ways, I would think that dancers, out of those 3, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners, we pick up by looking at someone. As children, we didn't have this shows you how old I am. We didn't have a television in our house until I was age 10.
Wow.
So in my ballet classes, I would pick things up very quickly. But I think that's one of the neurodiverse traits as well, to be able to see something and do it yourself. And then the fact that we had to learn the old French, the French terms, and I noticed you called it combinations when you mentioned it earlier. Of course, they're enchaînement.
Correct.
And so we learned all of those. So from age 6 when I started, I was learning French. I hated French at school. I could not do it. I had a mock exam before we could take the real exam, and I think I got 14 out of 100. And they said, well, there's no point in you doing your exam. So I didn't do French. I came away from school with 3 exams. I got a distinction in general science. I passed the hardest maths, one which was maths 2, but failed the maths 1. And I got English language, and that was it. That was all I was useless at school. I was good at sports. I played cricket and what you call soccer. We call it football. So I played those 2, and I excelled in that. I played for 2 men's teams at cricket, and I didn't do football after I left school. So those are the things that I enjoy. And then, of course, when I got older into middle age, I did 2 basic degrees and 2 master's degrees. I didn't know how I got through them, having not got any of that earlier on. But because I wanted to do it. And those are the things I didn't want to do. And that shows the neurodiverse traits of not doing what you don't want to do. There's some things in ballets you don't want to do, but you understand as you get older that it's part of your job. You have to do it, and you just resign yourself to it. And in fact, as long as you bring fun into it, it's okay. And so when you do, hey, we're doing do again. When you do the things that you like doing, it shows. And I think if you bring the joy into auditions, exams, and performances, then that comes back, 100-fold. It's the feeling you're giving to someone else. And I coach people for auditions, not from a necessarily technical point of view, but in a mindset point of view. And I say, from the waist up, if you're performing and looking as though you're enjoying it, they're not going to look at your feet and legs. Because they're getting that wonderful feeling back from you. Obviously, in an exam, they want the technicalities to be right. If you look as though you're enjoying it, there's no worry there, because a lot of people go into these things in fight and flight. And once you're in fight and flight, all the shoulders lock up, everything, the body goes all stiff, and you're just doing it robotically and without that enjoyment that needs to come across to the audience. And the audience can be those that are at the audition, the examiner, and the competition, so the judges as well. And if you understand that all of those three aspects are subjective to the person that is out there, even the audience, it's subjective.
Mm-hmm.
It's their impression of what you're giving them, and whether or
Yeah.
not they're being triggered by something you're doing,
Yep.
the way that you look. We have to as therapists, we have to understand that there's a counter transference. So there's a transference from the patient to us, how we're seeing the patient, but the counter transference is the same. How the reactions that they're getting from us as therapists. Do I look like a nasty old uncle that was really abusive and shouting and screaming to that, or an old teacher that put the fear of God into them? We're not
Mm-hmm.
we're not necessarily going to get anywhere if that's the case, and that's where I bring it out. Is there something about me that is upsetting you? And that's part of therapy. Then they start talking about it, and then it comes out, and it's out
Right.
in the ether, and it's gone, that they're holding on to. I know we're not
Yeah.
talking about school now, but we are talking about teachers.
Yeah.
And
I
if
mean, it's the
that
same.
teacher is upsetting someone, but they don't know it, that needs to come out. Not that the
Oh, yeah.
teachers be therapists, but is there something about me that is upsetting you? Do I remind you of somebody? I always use the example of a red shirt. So this adult, there's little Johnny in the wings, just about to go on. He's 10 years old, and this adult with a red shirt comes and bends down and says something not nice just before they go on stage in their first show or something like that. That gets recorded into their unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And as they get older, they go into a company, and a visiting choreographer comes to do a show, but they've chosen them, Johnny, to be in their piece that they're going to be performing. And Johnny says, I don't like that choreographer. I don't know what it is about him. I just don't like him. Then he wears red. And so it's an unconscious thing that needs to be got rid of. And especially in therapy, you can do that. It's a safe place to do those sort of things. But it's just to get teachers to recognize that they may be doing nothing wrong
Yeah.
for a student, but the student just will not work for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I deal with that on a daily basis. It is very
yeah,
interesting.
it would, yeah, and they're academic as well.
Yeah. In both worlds.
Yeah.
This student was just like holding back. He almost like didn't not want anything to do with me. And even though I have my beliefs and they are very progressive and very forward and whatnot, this student saw me as a threat potentially. And like I'm saying this in hindsight now because I know what happened, but he came in and just immediately was like, nope, I'm not going to have it. And was such an interesting dynamic to go through. And it wasn't until like months down the line it was like, what's going on? Like, I feel like I'm not reaching everybody else. I'm getting all this stuff to, but like, what's going on between us? I want to get to the bottom of this because it's not helping you. My class is not helping you. And there was just a conversation that we had, and he was like, I just don't think I'm going to learn from you. And I was like, first I was taken aback, and like, of course my ego took a hit, and I was like, well, okay, what's not to learn? I was like, I'm giving everything. And he's like, no, your teaching is fine, but I just don't know if I can learn from you. And I was like, oh, why? And then he gave me this backstory of like, it's not you per se, but it's just the type of person that you are. And I was like, I'm not offended because I would not learn from like a specific person in high school because of the type of person they were. And, I was just like, oh, that's okay. You don't have to, you can take what you can. Take what you can and move forward, because even in college, even in all these other places for me, there were teachers where I was like, no, you're not for me. And I just put my block on and I just went forward, and I needed to protect myself because there's underlying issues and things that happened in my life where I was like, I'm not going to give my energy to you because I know that you're not going to use it wisely. And so there's these protections that we put on as human beings that ultimately, like, it's just something that should be on our radar as teachers, but it is quite an interesting concept. And then, like what you were saying earlier, is there's probably more to this than you realize as a teacher, but also as a student, if you're listening. There's more to this dynamic of ballet class than we realize, and even we're not even talking about today, that we'll probably talk about later, that you should start thinking about too. And like, how is this affecting my technique? How is it affecting the way in which I am perceiving the education for myself? And what are the next steps that I can do to try to actually progress this and make it better for myself? It takes a lot of maturity depending on where you're at in your walk, but man, it's such an amazing practice to have and behavior to have as a professional, but also as a learning person, which we're always learning. I'm sure you will say that too. We're always learning. But yeah, I'll rest my case there. But it is very interesting, and it was a very interesting case with the student. And we ended up having, at the end of the year, we ended up having a heart-to-heart. And like, was it that bad? And he's like, no, you actually proved to be better than my expectations. And I was like, oh, my heart, like I made the difference because I did the hard work and like sought after that student instead of just giving up on him. And when he gave up on me, I just continued. I continued that relationship with him and tried to make it better for him in that class, which not a lot of people would do. And I'm not tooting my own horn, because I've definitely had the opposite in my life where I was not as mature as I am now. But is something that we need to start thinking about as teachers and as dancers. We need to think about it too,
I think teachers that are listening to this, and if they stick with the different conversations that we have, either two of us or the invited guests as well, if they stick with it, then they're going to be learning a lot if they want to learn. Yeah. And I can imagine that early on, maybe even, this conversation, there's going to be some teachers, well, they're all soft, aren't they? These two are soft. Yeah. We need to push the students. We need to do this. They're just going to be all soft students. Well, they're not. And there's 3 words that you can use, which for that type of teacher will say, oh, that's soft. It's not to ask these direct questions. Why aren't you doing this? Why are you unhappy today? Well, and that. So the 3 words are, and get your pens and papers out now. The 3 words are interested, curious, and wonder. So you put one of those 3 in front of the question. I'm curious to know why you're not able to do this today when you did it last week. So you're getting something from it. If someone says, why can't you do it this week when you did it last week? I don't know. Right. And it closes the person up. They're going back into fear again. But you'll break that fear by softening that. I'm not saying that you should become trained to be a therapist, but these are the sort of words that we use, that we are curious about how people think, and the actions that they do and why they're doing it to make themselves feel worse. So you can do exactly the same thing as a teacher and be curious as to why this isn't happening this week, but it was the week before or previous times that you did it, or why they're not feeling well, why they didn't turn up for class last week or for rehearsals. There are reasons why people, the thing about Sunday night a child has a stomachache. Because Monday morning, one of the first classes is that the teacher has been awful to them, or they don't like the subject. And psychosomatically, they create a stomachache. Or they're either lying about the stomach, or they actually do have a stomachache, but it's brought on psychosomatically. It's real. It's real to them. It is. The discomfort, the pain of whatever, or I've got a bad back. Is it real? Injuries as well. But injury takes a certain time usually to heal up. If it continues, then there's something psychosomatically. So there's something emotionally, mentally going on for that individual, which continues. I know we're going off track here. But as a teacher, you need to recognize those sort of things. Oh, you've still got the injury. So something's going on for them emotionally or mentally that has created this psychosomatic link. And there's an intrinsic link between the mind and the body.
Really,
as
there is.
We've already talked about earlier, not in this previous conversations.
Right. Yeah. It's very true. Those are things that it's like the more you know. There's this thing in America, there's like a old 90s thing, it's like the more you know, and it's this like shooting star thing. But it's really true. The more that you know, you realize there's less that you know. And you also realize that you need to have grace as you go about understanding others and your practice, whatever it may be. Because at the end of the day, there's no one person here that knows everything. We're all trying to figure it out, and we're all trying to help each other figure it out. And that's what this conversation and the conversations that we are about to have and continue to have are about too. And that's why we're calling it In Conversation With, because it really is just a conversation about what can we do? What are some things that we can do to change the industry, to start bringing it to the next level and spark those curiosity questions and whatnot. But that's such an interesting phenomenon, and something that I think that we can definitely touch upon in future talks and discussions and whatnot, because I know you have a lot of anecdotes, and I do too, about those things happening with students. And once we meaning the student and I started like really diving into the reason behind their injury and whatnot, it was very interesting like what happened to them and how they were able to actually get through their injury because of those conversations. Not that I'm like a licensed therapist or anything of that sort, but I do understand that psychosomatic connections and how it can affect a performance, or a person's performance day to day, but also the performance. But with all that being said, I think that this is such a great pinpoint where we can really just have a moment to reflect and to consider all of the things that we have talked about so far as we progress into the next conversation. Because you and I, we can go off, we can talk and talk and talk because we are passionate about it. And I think viewers, if
Right.
you're watching, you can see the passion in our eyes and in a way in which we're talking about it. You can also see how we're both neurodiverse, and that's something beautiful about this too. We have this understanding that it's just a little bit different. So I think what I would love to do is consider some ways that we can progress this. How can we take the conversation to the next level where we're really thinking about what is the next step? And I think the next step is this kind of resistance to change. That's something that we touched upon here in this conversation, but I'd love to kind of let that be our like highlight of the next conversation. Is how is it that we can address the concerns that parents, that teachers, that the dance industry or ballet industry, the professional industry has of being soft to your students, and have them encourage them to have more like an open-minded approach to this evolving pedagogy. I'll kind of like leave that question there to let the audience be curious and to think about some things too. And if you are curious or you have some thoughts about that question, I would love to have you guys send me an email, and I'll put it in the link in the show notes at the bottom for you guys to send me some of those questions, and some instructions down there too. I think that's something that would be very interesting, is what do you guys think? How can we address these concerns and encourage a more open-minded approach to the evolving pedagogy? And if you don't agree with the evolving pedagogy, I want to hear that too, because that's progress, right? Those are things that I
Mm.
think can help us have a conversation even better than people who are just like, yes, amen, you know? So if you are interested in this conversation, or you have a disinterest and you want to combat it, and you want to hear some of the answers that we may have based on those responses, send me that email, let me know, let us know too. We'll have another conversation very soon. But are there any last words that you would like to say before we sign off and bid adieu to our listeners?
I think, Austin, you've said it all.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. As always, Terry, I think that we have tremendous conversations. I would love to be closer to you so that we wouldn't have to have these fun little moments in between of trying to figure out, hey, is it supper time for you? Is it morning time for me? For the listeners, we're like London and California, so it's a little bit,
Well,
or England and
to
California.
invite me over to California, and I'll do a workshops tour of California, and there you got me
Fine.
then.
You're pulling my leg here, whatever, that's fine. That's cool with me. But
Okay.
until next time, I'll go ahead and sign us off here. Thanks for listening, y'all, and for being a part of the conversation. Like I encouraged you before, reach out with some questions you may have or even some concerns that you have. We want to address them. We want to talk about them. That's the point of this conversation, is to continue progressing, continue loving on our art form and making it better for the next generation so that they can have something even greater than we experienced. And so with that, thanks for listening, and we will talk to you next time.
Goodbye.